Hi everyone, welcome to episode 88 of the ITSM crowd. Our topic today is words, language and how it can help us or hinder us in getting the job done. My name's Claire Agutter. I'm the host for today's session and I've got three wonderful guests with me who I'm going to start by asking to introduce themselves. So, Roy, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, please.
Ooh, gentlemen first on this broadcast. Okay. Hello, everyone. Roy Atkinson. I'm the CEO of Clifton Butterfield LLC. We're a business advisory practice here in the US of A, but do stuff globally, obviously. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you very much. Did we come to Roy first as our token male on this panel? That's what it is. And Simone, if you want to say hello, please.
Hi, I think hopefully our regulars will know already who I am. If you're not sure, snapshot bio, easy to just read LinkedIn. But really my focus is around humanising IT, guiding organisations on their digital journey in adapting to the human technology side of things and blending various approaches and frameworks so that as we're changing in this dynamic world, that rather than technology defining us, as we get to harness it instead.
Thank you very much. And Kirstie.
So, I've been in the business of service management, I guess, for the last 20 odd years. But in the last 18 months, I took a slight detour and I'm currently working as a senior business relationship manager. So this conversation about language is very appropriate for the role I've got at the moment, because BRMs do lead that, try and lead and gently guide people into using the right language between IT and the people we look after. So I'm really looking forward to this chat today.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. And Roy, thank you for being with us at the very beginning of your day, and Kirstie at the end of your day, and Simone pretty much in the middle. We've got all the time zones covered. For those of you that are with us live, I can see you watching on YouTube. You can put questions to our panel using YouTube comments. So if there's anything that you'd like to chip in, it could be an example, it could be something that you'd like us to dig into a little bit deeper, just pop it in the comments and we can bring it up on screen and we'd be happy to discuss it now. But I think for anybody who's been not even working in service management, just working with people for any length of time, we've all been in some kind of situation where there's been crossed wires, confusion, something's not quite got across with something we were either trying to say or trying to listen to. So this, I think, is something that's familiar to all of us, the importance of language. But Simone, you were the one who suggested this topic. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you think it's so relevant now?
Well, I've always loved languages for a start, and the culture that goes along with it. So linguistics has been something that's always fascinated me because it tells me a lot about people. You know, it tells me a lot about who they are and where they're from and that type of thing. And you know, based on what I've been working with in terms of humanizing IT, emotional and ethical AI, how do we design backstories and personalities around AI and our communications in that form? I was really wanting to take the conversation about communication up a notch. I didn't want to just talk about some of the standard communication things that we have, because language is really deep-seated culturally, and it evolves. And it evolves in the context of what's happening, you know, socially, globally, and that type of thing. So traditionally, you know, for us, the onus has been on, you know, people that come into the office, they have to assimilate into the culture. Part of their ability is to, what we'd say, code switch into specific type of professional communication style of that organisation. But now it's really regarded more as a forced assimilation, you know, to a shared lexicon that we might have. And that's not really sustainable in some of the environments that's going on now. And there are a lot of people, we're not so willing to code switch, if you like, into specifics now in the way people are. We don't want it enforced on us. We want to be us. We want to have the workplace harmony. We want to have productivity. And there's a lot of noise in the digital environment that we're undergoing. So I think there's a real major shift in language within organisations as well, and the way we see people and the way we interact with people. And if we're looking a lot more at creating a more diverse and inclusive workspace, then that's also about language, the tone, who I am as a person, and how do I express myself in that workplace. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I really want to do this. I want to take it up a notch.
Understood. And Kirstie, you mentioned that in your role at the moment, language is very important. And one of the things that you said was this business IT conversation, which I think is certainly for service managers is the root of about 90% of the issues with our job. But how do you find that the language issue crops up?
It actually cropped up really directly a couple of weeks ago in a meeting we had with partners out in the organisation, and we were sitting there, and one of the people who was in the meeting started talking about users and customers, and I mean I don't like those terms. We used 20 years ago when I started in service management, we called the people who consumed our IT services users, and it never really gelled very well with me. And then we started moving along and calling them customers. And I don't know that that's right too if you're an internal IT organisation. But the conversation we had in this meeting was stop referring to us as the business. We're not a business. I mean, the organisation I'm with at the moment is not a money-making organisation. We're there to serve. So they said, stop calling us your business partners. We're not in business. So then we sort of said, well, what do you want us to call you then? And that was the problem. They didn't know. So we're sort of shifting towards perhaps they're our operational partners. So we're trying to it's actually a job we've got at the moment, is to try and work out what the appropriate language is that is not going to offend people, but actually encapsulates what our relationship is. So because the relationship between technology and the business, if you want to call it that, has changed so much, the language has had to really, really shift as well. And we need to be very careful that we are using the right terms, that we're not causing offence, and that we are using language that brings us together rather than pushes us apart.
Yeah, and I mean, Roy, I know a lot of your focus is in that customer experience space, isn't it? Is this something that you see as well?
It is, and I go back, I guess about a dozen years now, and we're having that conversation about users and customers where I was working, which was a large research laboratory. And we asked, we said, that's me. I'm going to go ask people. What do you think? Users, customers, who are you people? And I was very surprised when one of the senior scientists said, "Oh, don't you dare call me a customer." And I kind of jolted, and I said, "What?" He says, "If I want to be a customer, I'll go to Walmart." I said, "Okay." He says, "Call me a user. That's what I am." I said, "Okay, whatever." So I think a lot of it depends on personal perspective, and it's very interesting to see that conversation. And as I've said in many discussions elsewhere, users, customers, clients, whatever you want to call folks that you work with and provide service for or do things for, by all means, set a conversation with your organization. Call them what you will. It's not something you can make up your own mind about, but just make sure it's okay with the folks you're talking about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. It's one of those things where, we've got so many generations in the workforce now. So we've got different styles going on, which is I find really fascinating. But it's funny because we're not willing to be that formal. Have you noticed there's a lot of formality has been dropped in certain cases, not all of
Yes.
it, but in certain ways. And so I think there's a lot of expectation now that we have a more relaxed style in the way that we communicate. I mean, even something as silly as what, began as something fun, like using emojis as a non-verbal communication, it's actually become a language. People are writing full sentences in emojis. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand what that symbol is, and this is where I think language is imperative, because it's in the way in which we understand or we're understood and know what to act on. From cave paintings, they knew where all the bison and everything was, or it was a good hunting ground, or they knew that this was the area for this type, to the symbolic writing, speech, and even through art. So it includes things like emojis and the way we communicate now. And we do want to connect. People always do want to connect. But I find that the connection, there is a connection with the way we speak and the place that surrounds us. So the landscape of the work environment, whether it's flat or it's dynamic, can actually dictate the tune of our language, if you like.
And that, sorry,
if I may jump, thank you. If I may jump in here for a second, there's an old joke, and humor has a great deal of truth embedded in it. There's an old joke about a university professor who's talking about language and says, in every language in the world, a double negative indicates a positive. And in no language in the world do two positives indicate a negative. And somebody in the back of the room says, yeah, right. So that conveyance of emotion comes in many ways. And because we do so much electronically now, emojis have become increasingly important. And I hate to tell you, but for years, I've been a student of language all my life. And for years and years and years, since I was probably in my early teens, I have been of the opinion that hieroglyphics are not pre-language. That's where we're going. So, and when emojis started to pop up, I went, yep, here we go.
I do. I think symbolism is definitely one of the ways it's going. The other thing I've noticed too, I wrote an article on what's your word, and I realized, and I went through a whole heap of podcasts that I had done over a period of time, and I thought, what is the word that I use more regularly than anything else? And then sat down and asked the question, well, what does that, if you review all your presentations and your meetings, what are your regular words? What's your core cache that you use? What do they mean to you? Are they habit or are they intentional? Do they represent you well? Are they expressing what you intended? And I think we need to look at that, because then you start to look at, do I need to break any habits? Do I need to shift the way I say things?
Yeah, it is always an interesting question how we adjust our language to other people, right? We are by nature imitators, and hence the bane of my existence, business jargon. Not a big fan of the buzzwords, but it happens. Somebody in a position of power somewhere says a word, let's say business ludes. And next thing you know, it's popping up on Twitter, it's on LinkedIn, you see that word, which is a non-word, everywhere. And speaking of non-words and language and the importance in our work, I've only ever been thrown out of a boss's office once. And the reason I got thrown out of my boss's office was having a contention. I said, that's not a word. Don't use that word. And it was just one of those made up words that happens in business. And I said, no, it's not a word. Don't use that. Boom, out.
Well, I tell you what, searching for an alternate word is not always easy unless you actually do some work to expand your vocabulary, right? I remember when I first, left the armed services and then went into civilian environment. And of course, I was using words rather relaxed and not words that are normally said in polite company. And I remember carrying these huge lever arch files, like a whole pile of them. And, you know, you never stack them properly, do you? There's always one that's going to tilt. Anyway, they all went flying and I stood there and I just went... And I'm searching because I know when it wants to come out. And all of a sudden I just went, oh, bother. And the client who had just walked out of his office said, Simone, I am so proud of you. They're searching for that other word.
And that also comes back to adapting your language to the situation you're in, doesn't it? I mean, coming out of the armed services, obviously the language you can use within the armed services, even at quite high levels of the hierarchy in armed services, the language is very different to what would be acceptable in other organisations.
Should we say straightforward?
Yeah, that's probably a good way of describing it, Simone. But adapting to who you're talking to, and then remember when you're outside that situation that language is not appropriate, and being able to, I guess, turn that switch so that the language you're using suits your audience. And the same goes for listening to the language that's being conveyed to you and not taking offence in situations where the language they're using is not what you would expect in other places, if that makes sense. It's that interpretation as well as the giving of language that you need to adapt for different situations.
And I think that sometimes it's unexpected. I've been watching the conversation that's currently going on about the word culture. There are people now who we call, organizational culture. The behavior inside the organization is generally called culture. There is currently a very serious discussion about whether that's appropriate or not, because people from other cultures in the world think that when we say culture, we're talking about their being different from us ethnically, nationally, whatever. When in fact, that's not generally what people mean.
Yeah.
But it's become a kind of one of those words that has gotten flagged as having a problem because, and this is what we have to remember about communication.
Exactly.
It's a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
And forget, we think communication is blasting information out, but it's not.
It's not. It's definitely two-way. That's a really interesting thing, because culture has always been, I always look at when in our workshops, ask the guys and say, tell me about the personality of your organization.
That's a good word.
And that's something I'll often, because you say, what's the culture like? And they say, I don't know. And I'll give them a few words. Is it conservative? Is it informal? Like just a couple of words just to start firing them off. And they really struggle with that a little bit. And I thought, well, okay, let's try and switch up the vocab, and started saying, well, what's the personality of it? Because it's like saying, what's the personality of your family, or what's the personality of your country? There is one there that is generic, if you like. It's made up of all the different people, but it doesn't mean you're not being inclusive. It's just the way those personalities have come together to create this, I guess, I don't know, amorphous being.
But this... carry on, Claire.
No, go on, Kirstie.
I was just going to say something that's probably more recent too with our use of language is that we're not just dealing with people in our own countries anymore. Yes. We're dealing with people all over the world, and you then have to be very, very careful about your use of language, because something that is perfectly acceptable in Australia or New Zealand or wherever is going to raise red flags to people from other parts of the world, because it's not the right language to use. So I think you have to really do, if you're getting into that international groups of people that you're talking to, I think it's really important before you get into those conversations that you do a little bit of research, you talk to people, you make sure that you're going in there with the right understanding of how the language you use is going to be received. And it may not be being received in the way that you are delivering it. So it's understanding what's happening on the other side as well as what you're sending out. And that is far more important now than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And even in the last year, where we've really become used to these virtual meetings and discussions, that, being aware of who you're talking to and where they are is a really important thing to think about.
Language is such a huge part of emotional agility, not just emotional intelligence. I want to take it a step further. That emotional vocab, someone says, "Oh, I'm really upset," or "I'm really angry at that," and I sort of go, "Whoa, can I just check in with you? Are we talking like mildly irritated here? Are we talking like I want to rage?" Because so I think learning, and even happiness, and and those sorts of things, it has a range. And trying to, Roy, you're a huge linguist. You've studied a number of different languages. If you were to take what Kirstie was saying, a word and take it into another language, they sound different and they come across different, don't they?
It sure do. And I will pull up a great example from American business. General Motors Corporation, which was insanely large at the time, in the early 1960s. Chevrolet division was coming out with a new small car, and they said, "Oh, it's going to be new, so let's go." They pulled up the Latin root for that and called it Nova. Well, the problem is that in Spanish, Nova means it doesn't go.
Yeah.
So it didn't sell well in Spanish-speaking communities here in the United States. Let's just leave it at that. But that's, there's so many different ways that things can get lost in the translation that it's really, you have to be very careful. And especially now, we're dealing globally all the time. People have different languages that they speak, even though English is usually the commercial language. Not everybody is as fluent as we would like them to be. Actually, my friend Werner Sauer would say that you cannot be fluent in any other language than your own, because fluency is again going back to the personality of your ethnic background and your cultural, if we dare say, background. Sometimes train whistles are involved in language. There's all kinds of things that happen, but be careful if you're using Google Translate or something like that, because it's the Inigo Montoya syndrome, which is, you keep using that word, I do not think it means what you think it means. Right.
I tell you one thing I've picked up in the last 15 months in the job I'm now in is I'm in an organization that uses more acronyms than it uses real words. And for new people into the organization, it is really, really difficult. And I've decided now that there are just no stupid questions. If I don't understand the acronyms that are being used, I'm just going to ask, whether it makes me look stupid or not. But for the people who are using those acronyms, I just wish they would stop for a moment and think about the audience they're talking to. Does everybody in the room actually know what the hell I'm talking about? Because a lot of the times they actually don't.
Well, see, I'm up for an organisation or a profession having its particular lexicon. That's fine, but the forced assimilation is where it gets really difficult. So, definitely, you're right on that one.
Yeah, there needs to be a little bit of understanding, because organisations are changing all the time. So if you've got new people coming into your organisation, make sure they actually understand the language that is, I guess, as Simone said, the personality.
Mm-hmm. And for years, we had this accusation at folks who happen to be working in IT, that IT had this arcane language that nobody understood. And of course, every aspect of the organization has its own language that nobody understands, except the people in the warehouse have their language, and people in the accounting office certainly have acronyms and shortcuts that they take in language, And I used to think that year end meant December. What did I know? Right. So we do have that communication issue all the time. And one of the things that I find fascinating and has driven me to learn different languages is simply that that connection between things. I'm fascinated by things like the enye in Spanish, the N with the Y sound, the enye, and how that is written in Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same letter. It's not, the double L becomes something else. And it's fascinating to see these little twists in language among different countries and different backgrounds. It's a fascinating world.
One of the things I think is really, we talk about active listening and engaging with who we're having this communication with and who we're having the relationship with, is even as something as simple as asking them, can you pronounce your name for me? I'd like to, or if I see there's a J, I often will ask, is this a yurt sound or a jurt sound? And it's really interesting that just taking that moment to verify with the person what's the real sound. And I mean, it's your name. That's something that's really personal. And I think that, that's one of the first things I always try to look at, because there's just too many ways of pronouncing things. And I'd rather not get it wrong.
I'm going to jump in here because whilst we could keep going with this conversation all day, we're coming to the end of our time. So as we normally do in these situations, I'd just like to go around and ask each of you if you have a top tip to share, something for people to think about, something for them to consider or read up on. And Roy, I'll come to you on that one first.
Oh, fine. Put me on the hot seat. There's an old joke about assume, which I won't go into, but don't assume that the person on the receiving end of whatever it is that you're saying understands you. Be clear, pay attention to how they're receiving the information, and try your best to understand the information they're giving back to you, and create that commonality in language, at least between you.
I think that's wonderful advice. And Kirstie?
That's actually pretty much the same as Roy's, is understand your audience. Make sure that you know their level of knowledge of the subject that you're talking about and the culture that they come from. Make sure you're using appropriate language for the people the person that you're talking to, or the audience that you're with, and talk to them. Really, really listen, have real conversations. Don't talk at people, talk with people. And that I think is probably one of the most important things, is that two-way conversation. Stop talking at people.
Yes, I think we've all been there in the one-way conversation. Thank you. And Simone, your top tips for people?
Well, I think the words we choose really matter to people's health and well-being, regardless of where the conversation is happening. So I think one of the best things you can do is improve your emotional literacy, I guess, your emotional vocabulary. When we are able to recognize, label, and understand our feelings and the feelings of others, when you can more accurately pinpoint the closest word to that feeling, then we can more accurately respond in that conversation. So visit something like atlasofemotions.org. There's a whole range there that you can play around with in terms of exploring emotional vocabulary. So start there.
That's wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think we could go on for at least another 30 minutes. Simone, at some point, I'm going to have you back to ask you about how we automate all of this from an AI perspective. But if you've enjoyed seeing Simone and Roy today, you can see more from them. They do is it every Friday? KTLO?
Not at the moment. We're on hiatus for an undetermined period of time, but KTLO is keeping the learning on, and there's 51 episodes of that on YouTube. You can go to the website and find that.
Yep, so definitely recommend catching up with that. I've enjoyed watching a lot of those episodes, so a lot more from Simone and Roy there. But thank you to everybody who's been watching live with us today. Thank you, Kirstie. Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Roy. And I will see everybody on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd. Thanks, everyone.